afternoon. Good afternoon to our friends in Europe and Africa.
Good morning to our friends in the Americas. It's been an early start for you, I believe.
And it's good evening to our friends in Asia.
Before we welcome you properly to the conference, we have a handful of housekeeping remarks to all of us.
Could we request that all the participants mute their microphones unless they take the floor? This will reduce the extra noise and help us focus on the speakers.
ICOM kindly requests that we notify you that all the sessions are going to be recorded so that they can be available later, to which you, by the way, agreed while registering at the conference. However, in the unlikely event that you do not agree to participate in a recorded session, please switch from our platform to the live stream. It is available on the CAMOC YouTube channel.
In order to have the best experience of the conference, we suggest that you use the active viewer speaker. We also hope for this event to be as interactive as possible and do count on you asking questions during our Q&A session. Please do it via our chat. We'll gladly refer the questions to the speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Digital CAMOC Conference. Welcome to Krakow. Let us greet all the participants from the real stone and mortar city of Krakow.
Which sadly is remote for most of you. However, a decision's been made to hold the too often postponed meeting in a hybrid form. Therefore, some of the brain parents and organizers are here with us.
While others are unfortunately with us but remotely. Perhaps with no further ado, this is the best moment for the opening speeches.
And to ask Joana Sousa Monteiro, the chairperson of CAMOC, to officially declare this conference open.
Good afternoon to all of you, dear CAMOC friends, dear conference delegates. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, even if in this hybrid model, to the annual CAMOC conference in Krakow, This time on this mostly online model, but also with some fellow Polish participants in the wonderful city of Krakow that we all miss. I do personally, for sure. This conference should have been taken place in Krakow in 2020, but COVID-19 forced us to postpone it, not once, but actually twice, as a face-to-face event, which we miss so much, but we cannot do yet. We had no intention of giving up the Krakow conference. It was not an option, and we are finally going ahead, thanks to the hard work and dedication of many CAMOC colleagues and the wonderful team of the Museum of Krakow under the leadership of Director Michal Niezabitowski, which is also a CAMOC board member too. We are sad cannot be in Krakow today to meet our colleagues in person, to visit the many sites that encompasses the Museum of Krakow, 19 sites if I can recall well, and to watch the Likud festivities in the city. That will be wonderful. However, we are confident that this conference will be effective and very interesting, judging by the amazing pool of speakers we are lucky to count on. Our theme is, as Director Michal Niezabitowski always wanted to be, the right to the city. A theme so vitally important to city living, based on concepts by two protagonists in particular, Henri Lefebvre and more recently David Harvey, which puts his concept in this form: the freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. It is about the right to help make the city a better place in which to live, but how city museums can actually make it happen. How can we help solve the problems and encourage the possibilities the city presents to us? Many people move to cities for the opportunities they offer, but for every opportunity there is a problem to be solved, like climate change, pollution, discrimination, poverty, and people's displacement. The pandemic has unveiled the complexity of many of these issues, bringing a new meaning to our conference theme, about which city museums rooted in local communities can play a significant role in creating awareness, connecting people, and acting as part of the solution. I would like to stress how privileged and grateful we feel to count on two outstanding keynote speakers. Firstly, Suayak Soy. It is wonderful to see you again. Former ICOM president and one of the most distinguished former chairs of CAMOC. And then Jacek Purchla, former vice mayor of Krakow, founder of the International Cultural Center in Krakow, and former chair of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. During the conference, during these 3 half days ahead of us, we will be able to listen to speakers from 22 countries, from Japan to the USA, from Canada to Australia, from Germany to Spain, Norway, France, Singapore, and Russia, and of course, Poland. I am extremely grateful to our fellow organizers from the Museum of Krakow, to Christoph and to Michal, and to also Michal Grabowski and all the others. And as always, to CAMOC Secretary, Super Secretary, Elena Savik, and to other of our board members, colleagues, like Jenny Shu, Sarah Hendrick, Catherine Cole, and so many others, and also to other CAMOC colleagues that are not yet in the board, like Andrea de la Place and Glenn Perkins, that have helped us a lot with inputting this conference and the book of abstracts and lots of other details on place. So I hope that this conference can give us a lot of food for thought and can be an inspirational experience to all of us, in which you can learn more and communicate to each other even at distance. Even if in spirit, I feel like being in the lovely city of Krakow. Thank you all for your great work.
Thank you very much. Thank you for outlining the agenda and welcoming the organizers and all the participants of the conference.
Time for the host, the director of the Museum of Krakow and a prime mover of the museum and of today's event, Michal Niezabitowski.
Let the opening continue.
Dear colleagues, I would welcome you to the CAMOC Krakow 2020 conference, which as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic is being held in 2021. My heart is split in half. One part is extremely happy, but in spite of all advertises, we were able to organize and hold this conference. We will have the opportunity to listen to highly interesting papers by leaders of City Museum from all over the world. I'm positive that they will provide lots of food for thought on the challenges of the modern world. However, the other part of my heart is sad. I'm welcoming you online, not personally. Unfortunately, our conference will not be an opportunity for face-to-face meetings, since today The word museum means mainly a meeting. Our meeting over the next 3 days will be difficult. I'm proud to see how much technological progress museums all over the world have made during the last year. I'm convinced that at some point in the future, electronic contacts will become a part of our everyday work. But when? And will these contacts bring to our relations the same types of kindness and openness that face-to-face contacts offer? I'm also thinking about cities. Our conferences are always a chance to learn about various cities. After all, our museums are all about cities. I know no other way to learn about a city than by experiencing. And this is where I am the saddest, because online I cannot provide you with an experience of Krakow. The city is made up of houses, streets, and infrastructure, but its main component is the intangible, the atmosphere, the traditions, the smells, tastes, and sounds. To experience this, you have to interact with the city through all the senses. Unfortunately, the internet still cannot put these elements across. It just so happens that June is the month when the richness of intangible heritage of Krakow explodes. During our conference, the iconic procession will march through the streets of Krakow. It's a tradition that goes back to the Middle Ages and is one of the city's founding myths. When we were planning our conference, I was hoping that you could see this tradition yourselves, that you could receive a bump with a iconic button for good luck and listen to Krakow folk music, dance with the residents of Krakow, become a part of Krakow. Unfortunately, this cannot be conveyed through the internet, and that makes us sad. But enough about sadness. The title of our conference is "You Have the Right to the City," especially today, when COVID-19 restrictions have limited so many of civil liberties. The issue of the right to the city gets a new meaning. This is a serious issue, and it concerns our work, the work of museum professionals in a city. Cities and museums share one important quality. They are all common good. This is why, for this conference, I would like to wish you that the time we spend together, although far away from each other, also allows us to build common good among us. The conference is only just beginning, so it is not yet the time to thank those who made it possible to take place. I will address them when the event is closing. However, I have to say one thing right now. If it wasn't for the determination of our chairwoman, Joana Monteiro, and the hard work of her and of Jelena Savic, this conference would not happen. During a storm, and in 2020 our world was going through a major storm, the rule of captain is to get the ship safely to the harbor. I am pleased to report that Captain Joana and First Officer Jelena have done precisely that. So, Joana and Jelena, it's a pleasure to serve on this ship under your command. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director. And we have one more voice from Krakow.
The Plenipotentiary of the Mayor of Krakow for Culture, Robert Piaskowski.
The floor is yours.
Hello everyone, welcome to Krakow, welcome to hybrid Krakow, the city where heritage plays a key role and museums are at the forefront, revealing the multidimensionality of time and measuring it in their own way. That's why I'm deeply honored to be here with you today at the opening of the long-postponed CAMOC conference. The world has changed during the last 2 years, but some things remain the same or become even more relevant. This includes the title of the conference. To whom does the city belong? You have the right to the city. So many questions to answer. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Mayor of Krakow, Professor Jacek from the very heart of Krakow Historic Center, literally few steps away from the legendary Market Square, a cultural and artistic monument listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. I wish I could have seen and heard you live here in Krakow. We wanted so much to demonstrate our hospitality and also our deep commitment to CAMOC, but I believe that very soon we will meet somewhere here in Krakow back. It won't be something new for you that Krakow is proud of the largest network of museums in Poland. And I do not say it with megalomania, nor do I say it for purely promotional reasons. I say this in order to make you aware that the city of Krakow today has almost 117 museums branches of national, municipal, regional or private museums. The vast diversity of Krakow's museums shows how the city has developed its general shape, but also its identity over the ages by describing itself through collections and exhibitions. The Museum of Archaeology tells the tales of prehistoric times. The Museum of Photography encourages us to reflect on the captured moments. The Ethnographic Museum explores the rhythm of time, reaching back to ancient and often forgotten days. The mythical timelessness of symbols can be found in many art museums, while local time, measured by the natural world, technological progress, and lives of individual Krakowians, reveals itself in myriad forms in regional branches or district museums, also of the Museum of Krakow. Krakow has unusually strong ties to the past. We don't see history as something that has lost its relevance because it is in the past. In contrary, it is an important element of our present reality and our raison d'être. We see it everywhere, in all our moments, in all our museums. Its traces are celebrated and preserved and remain a source of inspiration. Our museums are the domain of the present. They are spaces which document official history and which present memories of people. We can think of it as a passing memory of past neighborhood, even if we weren't close friends. The stories focused around exhibits help us feel like we belong to a place and community which intertwines the past with the present. We understand heritage as a multitude of voices, interpretations, and participants. Many of Krakow's museums aren't afraid of asking difficult questions, even when, or perhaps especially when, there are no simple answers. Museums allow us to tread the past as a source of reconciliation. For us, they are a network entwining the city with meanings. They make the city resilient. They make us resilient as a society. These are, however, the museums that have proved so fragile and vulnerable in the face of COVID. But it is they that will document this extraordinary time, and at the same time will be the real hospitals of human stories, where we will glue our world back together. Given the widespread view in that the role of museums is not simply to preserve traces of the future, but to encourage discussion by creating situations which can be interpreted in myriad ways, museum stories are becoming even more powerful. Even more so, they frequently encourage visitors to become a part of the story, giving rise to hope that although everything has been done before, there is still a brand new everything to discover. Museums are an important means of cultural exchange, enrichment of cultures, and development of mutual understanding, cooperation, inclusion, and peace among people. So who owns the city? To those who want to add their story to the stories that already exist. The story of the people told in many voices. The polyphonic story of museums. We all have a right to the city, as long as we respect each other's stories, with attention, with tenderness, with respect. Krakow is also very happy to have the Museum of Krakow network, led by a charismatic one-of-a-kind visionary leader, Dr. Michal Niezabitowski. And I would like to thank Dr. Niezabitowski for taking the challenge to organize this conference with CAMOC in its hybrid dimension, and for being an ambassador of Polish museology in the world. This year, the theme of the International Museum Day was the future of museums, recover and reimagine. Indeed, let's reimagine, let's recover. I wish you a very successful conference, and I invite you to create, imagine, and share new practices of creation of value and innovate solutions for the social, economic, and environmental challenges of the present. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Robert Piaskowski. This way we've opened our 3-day conference for museums of cities on the right to the city.
And we have plenty in store for all of us. We have already learned who we are going to meet and more or less what we are going to talk about. But everything that is the fine detail will come to you during these 3 days or perhaps 3 half days.
We've planned for today a keynote speech and 2 sessions of lectures, each followed by a Q&A session. Please ask questions via our chat, and we'll refer them to the speakers.
There will be a creative break today from 4 to 5 p.m. Central European time.
This is the time for you, speed dating, in which you'll be randomly assigned to groups of 5 every 5 minutes, so that you can mingle like at a traditional conference.
This means that this will be a very good idea to exchange your contact data. Perhaps if you had your contact data ready, legible and in large letters, you could show it to other people in your breakdown session so that you don't lose time for showing them that.
You can send your questions to this email, and we'll refer them to our speakers. This is, of course, an alternative to posting them on our chat.
We will be delighted to have them. And as we cannot, unfortunately, share the delicious Museum of Krakow tea and coffee with you, we have also slated a short break at 3 p.m., again, the Central European time, when you can rest your eyes from the screen and have a drink of your choice.
Provided it's legal in your country. Time for the keynote. The speaker is the one and only Professor Jacek Purchla, an art historian, economist, a former chairperson of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee, and an expert member of the ICOMOS International Scientific Committee.
Please use the chat to ask questions, and we will read them out to Professor Purchla and will ask him for answers.
Time to become familiar with the heritage and identity of a Central European city.
Welcome to Mitteleuropa.
Welcome to Krakow and welcome in Krakow, truly Central European city. Today I am extremely honored and privileged to speak at the conference titled The Right to the City. It is also a long tradition and experience of Central European cities. But let me please start with such a reflection that there can be no doubt that the best evidence of Central Europe's achievements as a civilization and the essence of its identity are its cities, including Prague, Budapest, Bratislava, and Krakow, which is privileged enough of being located in the center of the region. Indeed, an understanding of the phenomenon of these cities, in particular their changing meanings and stories, and a broader historical perspective on the changing nature of their functions, are crucial to comprehending the very essence of Europe Minor, or the younger Europe. If Christianity and local government are to be seen as two of the foundations of the Latin civilization, it is also the millennial experience of Central European cities. I do emphasize the millennial, as the beginnings with Christianity used to be quite modest. Central Europe, the countries of V4 group, are at the moment located as the eastern borderland of European Union. But as a short footnote, let me please just to remind that we, the Central Europeans, used to be considered in the time of the ancient Roman Empire as the barbarians, which has been continued also during the era of Charlemagne. The beginnings of this experience with the civilization of Latin Europe comes for the three early medieval kingdoms of Bohemia, of Hungary, and of Poland in the mid of the 10th century, which is important to remember. And one of the pillars of European urbanization was, no doubt about that, municipal self-government, which was gradually gaining new rights and privileges. The autonomy enjoyed by medieval cities as a result of the revolution, that was the formation of communes, was the source of the power, and urban law was also instrumental in determining the spatial layout. The chartering of medieval towns provided not only a framework for the spatial development, but also a foundation of the legal and economic organization. In this respect, German law became the paradigm to be emulated. Throughout Central Europe of the day, the culture of the German language played a special role in creating a new model of urbanization. It is Prague where as early as during in the period 1176-78, the Bohemian Duke Sobieslaus II bestowed a privilege on the Germans in Prague, which is widely recognized as the first endowment of urban legal autonomy in Central Europe, Lex Justitia Teutonicorum. The inflow of German colonies contributed to multi-ethnicity, and the newcomers were the organizers of the urban borough. These colonies, the medieval equivalent of housing developers, brought a standardized organizational and legal model as far east as Transylvania, up to the limes of Latin Europe. It is, at its heart was the concept of the legal identity of the burgher, cives, a citizen, within the city limits. This was encapsulated in the phrase, "Die Stadtluft macht frei," city air makes one free. At the same time, German law offered a framework for the development of the market economy. Among the first rulers to perceive a direct link between application of German law, or in other words, Magdeburg law, following the pattern of the imperial city of Magdeburg, and rapid economic growth, was the Silesian line of the Piast, the first Polish dynasty, who used German law as the foundation for chartering towns, starting with Goldberg, Złotoryja, 1211, and ultimately in 1242, Wrocław, the capital of the province. Silesia rapidly evolved into not only the most highly urbanized province in the Polish lands, but also the most densely urbanized part of Central Europe. By the year 1350, more than a quarter of the population of Silesia lived in towns. Unlike the Bohemian rulers in the neighboring realm, the Silesian Piasts virtually monopolized the urbanization process of their provinces. And now comes Krakow. Krakow followed the example of the Silesian towns. The foundation for the reorganization of the city, existing, of course, much earlier, was the charter privilege used by the Duke of Krakow, also a member of the Piast dynasty, issued on June 1257. Here, German or Magdeburg law was employed as the basis for the new order in the city, and the system was first implemented by incomers from Silesia, mentioned in the document, which is well kept here in Krakow. Three fundamental conceptions of Central Europe, those of the Hansa, the Jagiellons, and the Habsburgs, correspond with the three periods of greatest civilizational and creative advancement in Krakow. Krakow is the only city, so to speak, that blends so creatively and harmoniously the influences from all three these diametrically different Central European integration systems, and as such, its experience offers a way to understanding the essence of the Central European urbanization model. The example of Krakow also offers a superb illustration of the complex significance of chartering cities under German law for the formation of the identity of Central Europe's cultural landscape. Prior to this development, the urbanization process had primarily been regulated by the spontaneous or even very spontaneous evolution of urban function and urban space. The Grand Charter bestowed a plan on the city that, in view of the unprecedented scale and symmetry of its urban layout, guaranteed Krakow a special place in the civilization of the day. It is also the reason why Krakow is inscribed at the World Heritage List so early, 1978, at the first list among the first inscribed places and sites. In the 14th century, with Prague was already among the largest cities in Central Europe. So the case of Krakow helps me today to deal with the title of my presentation. In the Krakow of the closing years of that century, that might be of the Hanseatic League as a trading force, came into contact with the new political vision of younger Europe. The 15th century was a time when two integrating concepts merged as the city developed and expanded. The Hansa, which is symbolized by the main square up to now, and the Europe of the Jagiellons, the Commonwealth of the Kingdom of Poland and the Great Duchy of Lithuania, covering the territories between the Baltic and the Black Sea, including not just Lithuania proper, but also Belarus and Ukraine, which symbolically is proved also at the Cathedral of Krakow as the mixture of Latin and Orthodox tradition and art. And although Krakow was on the very furthest fringes of Hanseatic Europe, in terms of the Jagiellonian conception, Wawel Castle was the very cradle of this new chapter of Europe Minor, and Italianism, looking at the main court of the royal residence, is also quite significant feature of our Central European identity. The union between Poland and Lithuania marked the beginning of the integration of two diametrically different states. Wawel, the seat of the Jagiellons, was to be of special significance in this very process. By extending Krakow's sphere of influence, the Union changed the position of the Polish capital within the settlement network of younger Europe, of Europe Minor. Krakow also rapidly became the main export hub for the Latin civilization to Vilnius and the lands of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The most recognizable brand of this civilization exported from Wawel, from Krakow, to the north and east of the Jagiellonian Empire, of the Commonwealth, and as far as Kyiv, was the Magdeburg system. Kyiv was chartered as the latest 1601. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, there were some 700 chartered towns in Poland, 6 of which were qualified as civitates primi ordinis. These were Gdańsk, but also Toruń and Lviv, Leopolis, now Ukraine. All of which fulfilled all the criteria for diversified cities as centers of economic, cultural, social, and religious life. The multi-ethnicity of metropolises meant that in cities such as Krakow, there were large communities of Jews, Germans, Italians, Ruthenians, Hungarians, and Scots. The Magdeburg system, for several centuries, the cornerstone of Central European cities, and central to the expansion, fell finally into crisis. One of the reasons for this was the curbing by the nobility of city rights and burgher rights, and also the seizure of the property and sovereignty by the absolutist Enlightenment state. So the second half of the 18th century is the bottom of the deep systemic crisis. Thus, the turn of the 19th century brought an irrevocable end to the concept of the town as an isolated island. Symbolic of this change was the demolition of medieval fortifications of many Central European towns and their replacement with grandiose rings and green public spaces. It is the experience of Vienna, which came relatively late since the mid of the 19th century, but also the experience of Krakow much earlier, executed already at the beginning of the 19th century. It is why the city which is today the host of our international venue is the medieval core of the city, is surrounded by this 3 kilometers long green belt named Planty. The fortification also triggered the spread of many cities. In the biggest cities in Central Europe, a clear distinction must be made now between the core, the noyau of the chartered town, and the sprawling, ethnically heterogeneous suburbs. In the Central European context, self-government and civilization in the 19th century is where Prussia and Austria were present. Austria in particular, from the 1860s onwards, evolved into a paragon of the liberal state. Modern self-government at the borough level was enshrined in the constitution and became the model adopted by all boroughs, municipalities, and local authorities throughout the Habsburg monarchy during the era of Francis Joseph I. The real era, almost 60 years time at the turn of the 19th and the 20th century. 1860 October Diploma marked the dawn of the constitutional era in Austria, which a year later formally became a constitutional monarchy. In March 1862, in a development of the principles of the October Diploma, a municipal law was passed that was to become the cornerstone of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy system of local self-government until its very end, covering territories belonging today to numerous Central European states and countries. It was a compromise, a product of the political game played by the conservative landed gentry on the one side and the liberal bourgeoisie on the other. The 19th century brought vast changes to Europe's settlement network. The creative tension that had one of its sources in the conflict that wrecked the Habsburg monarchy generated the new identity of Cacañas, so to speak, towns. This is why tradition and modernization, national identity and urbanization were crucial issues in the expansion of Central Europe's largest cities in this period. The turn of the century city was the idea and quintessence of modernity. A fundamental developmental benchmark in this vast undertaking to modernize and standardize Central Europe cities was Vienna. And the creation between the imperial capital as a model to be emulated and the provincial metropolises. On the eye of the First World War, Vienna, with its population of 2 million, was the 6th largest city in the world. On the threshold of the 20th century, the Großstadt on the Danube was not only a boundless modern city, but also, as Otto Wagner wrote, a city machine, a symbol of 20th century civilization. Vienna, die Weltstadt. The Viennese character of several other Central European cities, this cosmopolitan breadth of the Danube civilization transformed to smaller cities, is the essential chapter to create the identity of Central European cities. The Viennese character of Lwów, Lemberg, Brno, Kraków, Graz consists in both the grandiose layout of the ring and the medieval core surrounded by those new developments. Another standardizing influence on the space of the monarchist cities that must be taken into consideration is that of the Habsburg administration. It affected not only the urban landscape and cultural policy, but even the urban sociotopography and anthropology. It was for this reason that Kraków and Lwów in 1914 were more similar in their urban identities to Prague, Graz, or Ljubljana than to Warsaw or Kiev. On the eve of the First World War, the dualist Austro-Hungarian monarchy had two great capitals, centers of the political and economic life of the realm, Vienna and Budapest. A separate group of centers were the capitals of the crown lands, including Prague, Brno, Lwów, Lviv, Czerniowce, Zagreb, Ljubljana, and some other. Some of them, above all, Prague and Zagreb, but also Trieste and Kraków, were also centers of national revival in this period. Industrialization was creating large new industrial towns, foremost among which were places in Bohemia and Moravia. The Hungarian part of the monarchy, with a prominent group of so-called local metropolises, such as the 100-strong cities and towns like Subotica, Timișoara, Temesvar, Oradea, Grosswardein, or Košice, which is Slovakia at the moment. It was this network of peripheral centers scattered across the multinational monarchy that lays Campania together into a homogeneous civilization. The major public and communal investment made at the turn of the century, railway lines, stations, public facilities, local infrastructure, and urban design and architecture had a lasting and characteristic impact on the urban landscape of Habsburg Central Europe. Coming to the conclusion, what should not avoid the experience of the 20th century? The year 1918 ushered in a fundamental change to the layout of Central Europe's settlement map. The case of Poland is the most convincing. It now had become a unique part of the old continent in which political borders changed far more rapidly than cultural ones. The First World War marked a sharp turning point in the development of Central Europe's cities. The collapse of Austro-Hungary marked the end of the second formative phase in the urbanization of Central Europe. The delayed beginning of the 20th century essentially brought not only the triumph of nationalism and later on totalitarian systems, but also the Holocaust and the Great Vacuum as the meaning of the Jewish population in many Central European cities is concerned. Heritage of this heritage, is also the fate of our 20th century experience in and of Central Europe. But it was also a matter of ethnic cleansing, simply the lesson of communism and Yalta, comprising East and West of 1945, there was no place for a center. As Karl Schlegel rightly pointed out, I quote, "The elimination of the center shifted one-time metropolises out onto the peripheries. The Sovietization, which is also the case of Krakow, Sovietization of Budapest, Prague, Krakow, Lviv, and many other cities of Central Europe clashed sharply with the tradition of these cities as places with a special potential for freedom and a unique way of building communities. Communism, including heavy industrialization, it is the case of Krakow, creating a disaster, was also, communism nullified the tradition of Central Europe and its civilizational achievements, nor did it have room for municipal self-government or civil society. It was those civilizational shock, and as such was in its turn rejected by the nations of Central Europe. It is also the experience of Krakow, the resistance. This is why the events of Budapest 1956 and Prague 1956 and Prague 1968 were viewed as symbolic of the fight for identity. It was also our way and our fight here in Krakow through culture, through our Nobel Prize winners in literature, music, and him, the Cardinal of Krakow, with this struggle and trial to maintain our identity, which definitely was Central European, not Soviet. And the triumphal entrance of Lech Wałęsa, the leader of Solidarność, at the main square of medieval Krakow, it is also a chapter of this very matter and this very experience, our struggle of the 80s for freedom and self-government. It was not a coincidence that intellectuals on both sides of the Iron Curtain, Georgi Konrad, Milan Kundera, Václav Havel, Czesław Miłosz, Erhard Busek, exploited the separate cultural identities of Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland to manifest these fundamental differences. Central Europe, according to Georgi Konrad, is simply a matter of conviction. And to finish, let me just quote once again Karl Schlegel, who wrote, "But our borders are visible in entirely different ways." It is the description of Central Europe isolated and divided in the 80s. Schlegel writes, "In the features common to railway station restaurant interiors from Trieste to Krakow, which are decorated in the same way, painted the same color, virtually everywhere. We move from one town to another, but we are constantly in the same place. We cross borders, but the conductor is always the same." The semantic force of the urban space of Prague, Bratislava, Krakow, and Budapest, and many other cities of Central Europe, revealed at this time was a kind of ex post test for the power of the standardizing potential of monarchy that had not existed for over half a century, but also the potential of our identity and our heritage. This remarkable experience of the metropolises of Central Europe confirms the accuracy of Italo Calvino's words. I quote, "The city does not tell its past, but contains it like the lines of a hand written in the corners of the streets, the gratings of the windows, the banisters of the steps, the antennae of the lighting roads, the poles of the flags, every segment marked in turn with scratches, indentations, scrolls." Central Europe Watershed Year 1989 has enabled us to look again to the various different meanings of the city, saying goodbye Lenin and having in Krakow at the moment this travesty of the era which is fortunately close. The city as a process, as a function, as an idea, as a form, as a mirror of our civilization means that the Central European city exists and proves how strong the meaning of urbanization and our identity and heritage is for our common future. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you to you, Professor. It's been very stimulating.
And it's been a real travel through all those ages and so many names, so many cities mentioned. We can clearly see that our participants have appreciated that.
And we have the first question, ladies and gentlemen. Let me read it out for you and for Professor. Dr. Purchla taught us about very important moments of the long and complex history of Krakow and its urban landscape. How do you expect Krakow to look like in the near future? In other words, what, in your view, could be the 2 or 3 main aspects of Krakow's development in the next coming years? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much indeed for this essential question. Yes, we are not just dedicated to the past. Krakow is very much future-oriented, but belongs to those cities and places where heritage still is essential for our present and future life. What is important for Krakow right now is, of course, to finish with the era of industrialization, of heavy industrialization, which was a kind of a souvenir given to Krakow pretty late after the Second World War in the era of Stalinism. I'm talking about this huge steelwork named after Lenin. Just a year ago, they finished to produce steel. And it is something symbolical, because Krakow used to be always heterogeneous concerning its urban functions, and it is the great advantage of Krakow as the very important university center, as one of the most important cultural centers of and in Central Europe. And I'm pretty convinced that those functions are essential for our future development in the network of Central European metropolises. And even further on, what is also important and essential, that Krakow is becoming once again more and more cosmopolitan. Through the whole 19th century, Krakow used to be, being under the Austrian occupation, considered by the Poles coming from all the regions and parts of non-existing Poland, from all the Polish territories, as the spiritual capital of Poland. I think that at the moment there is no any contradiction between this very function and the cosmopolitan character of the city, city attracting young people coming here not only to study at our university, but also just to work. And the sector of share services here in Krakow, so rapidly developed during the last 1 or 2 decades, makes Krakow the leader of this very part of new services and new industries at the European continent. And finally, what is my dream, my personal dream? It is, of course, the dream very much connected with the process of European integration. European integration. Krakow is located just halfway, exactly, in between Warsaw, Prague, Bratislava, Budapest. Namely, is the only big historical metropolis of Central Europe of such a potential and dimension, not fulfilling any important political function at the moment. And I do find this special position of Krakow as the advantage which should be used by all the Central European countries to accelerate the process of our regional integration.
Thank you very much, Professor, especially on behalf of the people of Krakow. Our dear participants, thank you very much for all the questions we've received, and I have that horrible now moment to tell you that we can't read any more questions because the time is running and all the time for the questions has already been spent. But please, please, don't just sit between your chair and a potted plant and the screen. Ask those questions. We promise, cross our heart, we will be asking them in the next sessions.
That was plenty of food for thought, ladies and gentlemen, but let's not forget about our bodies either. It's time to stretch. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in this absolutely stunning courtyard hidden from the eye.
And it is only one of around 50 such courtyards around the main market square of Krakow. In the city, we've got literally hundreds of them.
This one belongs to the Museum of Krakow, and this is precisely where we hoped to serve you our refreshments during the coffee break.
We even thought that those of you who might smoke could indulge in an unhealthy custom, but unfortunately, because of more unhealthy things, we've got to meet one another only remotely.
This is why we decided to take you here. Enjoy your coffee break.
This is the beginning of the coffee break, and we have 5 minutes' time.
See you then. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, during the coffee break, we will also show you a short film about our Lyconic festival. As most of the public events last year, this festival was also held in a digital form.
Lyconic, or the Hobby Halls of Krakow, also known as the Pony of Krakow or Pony of Zwierzyniec, is a commemoration of a historical moment that might have taken place as early as 1241. And now every year we celebrate the brave local people, and this is also a part of the thesaurus of the heritage of Krakow. We invite you to a short film during this break.
Welcome after the break. We hope that you've enjoyed your tea or coffee with a nice view of the royal capital city of Krakow.
The context has been set, and it's time for the first session today. The speaker is Margriet Schavemaker from the Netherlands.
Addressing the City Museum in the age of polarization, she'll explain whether museums are or are not neutral.
Madam?
Hi, welcome to my talk, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be a part of this conference and that we all have been looking towards, I think, for a year now or so. And I would like to share my screen, which I'll start doing. I hope that I will manage to do so. Wait, it doesn't select yet my PowerPoint, I'm sorry. Give me 1 more minute. Doesn't seem to select the right documents. 1 second, sorry. And I thought I should have been at a testing thing, and then it would have all been fine. And of course, we all have been in Zoom forever. Okay, I'm starting it again. Yes. I hope this is the right one. Yes. Okay, let me see. Yeah, you see this, right? I can't see you guys, but I hope you hear me. This is a grand day actually for us today, and because tonight, and this is secret, this big thing will be hoisted over our roof onto this courtyard or the square here in the museum. And this is the Golden Coach. And this is an object from 1898, which was offered by the city of Amsterdam to the then first queen, Wilhelmina, by the city. And we're making a big exhibition around it, and it's a contested heritage to the max because of this panel. There's a panel on the side depicting a tribute from the colonies. And you see here people from the colonies in the West and the East that the big kingdom of the Netherlands at that time consisted of, the West Caribbean, Indonesia, the Molucca, offering their goods to a white, young female personification of the Netherlands. And the king normally rides this coach every year for the opening of the House of Parliament after the summer. And we're creating this big exhibition, which will open next week, curated also by a big team, together with in the lead Annemarie van der Wild, who will be talking to us all on Friday. And but we've compiled it with a big interdisciplinary team. We had a sounding board of 25 members from all over the community, and we have a mobile research installation, extensive public program, a publication, and 16 newly commissioned artworks. And this is the phase we're all very excited here. We reopened our doors last week after 6 months of closure here in the Netherlands. And then this exhibition will happen, which is a big moment for us. Neutrality or not neutrality is a big issue here, but I will first would like to reflect on also where we came from, because this exhibition is key in a major debate in the Netherlands. It's just everybody knows what this carriage is, and also what will the king decide to do with it after this exhibition. Will it ever ride again, like you see here, or not? And this is the biggest question. And neutrality, how do you offer a dialogue as a museum that is at one side offering a lot of context about the colonial history of this contested heritage, and yet at the same time offer also incredible lot of space for people who just would like to celebrate our king and queen and the House of Orange. So offering a place, a middle ground in a way for a dialogue is something that is in a way key to this exhibition. Yet, but who are we to organize that? We are the Amsterdam Museum. We're a city museum. We are a network museum. We always do everything what we do it together with other people. We have a location in the heart of the historical part of the city, but also other locations like Hermitage, which is more outside of the city center, but also we collaborate with all the public libraries here in the city and many, many other institutions. We work often in co-creations, working with communities, creating new reflections on and new pieces for our collection on who Amsterdammers are, what their lives entail, and what the city is transforming into via their lives. Yet at the same time, we have an amazing collection of historical pieces, also Rembrandt, Leonardo, compiled by the city. And we offer also an overview of, for instance, the brothers and sisters of Rembrandt's Night Watch in our Hermitage Dépendance. Many of you I know have visited us, and this is a wonderful presentation conceived by our previous director, Paul Spies, and a group of curators. And what we're doing right now at this moment, because this is, in a way, it was called the Portrait Gallery of the Golden Age. And what we did the past 2 years is work with contemporary makers like Jurgen Sonnenfong to create dialogues with this heritage and offer insights in what is not depicted on them. And that is, for instance, historical people of color in the 17th and 18th century living in Amsterdam. And we did research in the city archive, looking for people of color and giving them a face. And these are famous Dutch Amsterdammers of color, portrayed by famous Dutch photographers of color from Amsterdam. And we hang them in the middle of these group portraits and alongside. And currently we have another exhibition. We do these interventions now every year. The first one was opened in September 2019. And we then decided also, that was based on years of programming around New Narratives, which is a program line in collaboration with lots of communities in the city to critically, in a way, dissect what we present and how we present it. We decided to drop the term Golden Age also in the title for this presentation at Hermitage, and said it's just Portrait Gallery of the 17th century, because Golden Age is already a very colored metaphor of a time that is very celebratory and is in a way not paying tribute to and not opening up for the black pages in a way of the history in that same period. Our Prime Minister responded within 2 hours after our press release and our statements and he says here on the left, the Golden Age is just a beautiful term. What a nonsense. It was a big discussion over everybody in the news. Everybody suddenly knew also what we were as a museum, which is interesting because our museum is not the biggest museum in Amsterdam and not very known. And this was September 2019. And how I had wanted to talk a year ago, envisioning this talk, the crux would be about the reflection, the critical reflection in a way, about this whole process, this whole project. Because what we of course decided was using a more neutral term, which is 17th century instead of Golden Age. But this was by society interpreted as being not neutral at all, is what's choosing sides. And it was also interpreted by many as adding and fueling to the polarization in society. And which was interesting because we conceive ourselves as a museum that is not neutral, because we see, we adhere to the new ICAM definition, and we really find it key to acknowledge that there's all kinds of power structures also inside our collection, inside our funding structures, so that we're not neutral. But we wanted to become more neutral in a sense, to open up and become more inclusive, sorry. But instead we were conceived by society or perceived as being exclusive, choosing sides. So this is a discussion that I wanted to have actually, but in these 15 minutes, I thought I cannot do this anymore because we are a year later now and so many things have happened. We had COVID putting in a way some sort of quiet in our city, but at the same time also bringing the city into, turning it into some sort of battlefield for people that wanted to speak up and do not agree with the powers that be and with the leadership of the nation, of the city, of global issues, of course, like systemic racism. But you see here anti-vaxxers, you see, well, there's many different kind of demonstrations, of course, which we all witnessed in our cities the past year. So how do you deal then with that as a city museum? And I think what we did the first couple of weeks after our first lockdown in March last year, in March 2020, first, I thought we should move slow. And also Nina Simon, I'm a big fan of her. She said, move slow when the path is not obvious and creativity could lead to better results. And I really like that first statement that she wrote down in a blog. However, we did move fast in the end, because 1.5 months later, we launched an open call for a big collecting project, Corona in the City, that we worked on together with over 40 partners, all kinds of institutions. We gave commissions to many cultural makers, artists, critics, poets, to create their own art pieces. And it became an online exhibition, Corona in the City, coronainthecity.nl, and you can find it. We opened 2 weeks later, mid-May, and since then we have over 3,000 contributions together with over 40 partners and over 150 visitors. And what do you see on this website? Well, we launched every week via a Zoom program, new gallery spaces that opened up, new contributions that were submitted, and in a way sort of gave significance and a reading of what was happening. It is a complete labyrinth, I must say that. So it is a mere aboire on what is being submitted. Of course, there are some lines. There is an interesting line, of course, of people submitting photographs and poems on how their life and also the public space has been completely altered by all these new measures that we had to follow up to. Very emotionally strong photographs from the IC, from hobby photographers / nurses working in the heat of the battle against COVID, which is of course something that we normally also don't see. There's also a very interesting the art of sharing in times of Corona. Often many people decided to reflect on how they became more close with communities that they normally wouldn't talk to. So it was also, there was a sort of new feeling of conviviality and a new sort of ownership. But most of all, people started sharing images of the empty city of Amsterdam, empty Dam Square, empty streets, empty everything. And of course, the weather was amazing, like it is also right now. And in peace and quiet during Corona. This is interesting because normally this particular canal looks like this. And we have a city that is overcrowded with tourism, like many of the cities that you work in as well. On a population of around 800,000, we receive over 80 million tourists each year. And that is something that, of course, if you have to talk about the right to a city, but if that is growing in a way that feels, in a way that creates some sort of challenges to the population. Like also we have many Nutella shops, and the feeling that there's monoculture instead of the layered culture that a city normally wants to have. And I had to think not of Henry Lefebvre, though I really like that this conference is such a homage also to his thinking, but I also had to think of Jane Jacobs, that because the past year has been a creative year also. And I like her quote that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody because and only when they are created by everybody. And I think that is something that creativity and the making of the city by everybody is something that is that has been lacking a lot, and that can create sort of unity. And that our platform, Corona in the City, really offered a meeting place for people wanting to create. Of course, that doesn't mean that everybody has the same rights to the city, not at all. These are contributions of undocumented people that are living in the city in the worst possible situations, amazing contributions, and where they even have, the person on the right and below says, I would even like to have the virus because I would feel more protected, and I cannot, follow up the rules because I have no space to be alone in. I think what the power of this platform has been that we also work with all kinds of communities that listen to voices that you normally don't hear, that don't respond to an open call. So the more, the people that are too shy or they're not, that there's no, in a way, space in their mind to normally respond to these kind of projects, that they are also brought on into contact with our makers, with our mediators, and share their stories. Of course, there in this time, a month after June 1st here, the Black Lives Matter demonstration also showed that the history of what was happening in the Netherlands in the colonial past has been not acknowledged too much, and to say the least, and that the worldwide, the global Black Lives Matter movement also hit Amsterdam majorly. This also turned up to be a big element on our Corona and the City website. And I think what I thought was very interesting is that our museum decided to respond like immediately before June 1st Black Lives Matter demonstration, like that we adhere to that movement. But there, if you talk about neutrality, I think all of your museums must have struggled also, like, when do you speak up? When do you contribute to these discussions? And I was very moved by the words also of Lonnie Bunch from the Smithsonian Museum, that also in his statement online makes clear why the museum decided to support Black Lives Matter, which of course right now you almost cannot understand anymore, because of course everybody says for support Black Lives Matter, but at that moment, that particular moment in time, it was a discussion, and maybe we can talk about that later as well. And what he says here is he describes also that we will join the struggle to seek justice and social equality. And then he says in the end, of course, in the memory of those taken from us, I hope that we do. So in a way saying that, of course, we support this. Right now, 2 weeks ago, we sort of celebrated the anniversary of 1 year of COVID in the city, Corona in the city, and we opened a traveling exhibition outside, opened by our city poet Gershwin Bonavacia, and he wrote this amazing poem on the whole platform. And what he said is, and I think it's a beautiful sum up of what this platform has become. Maybe that is our purpose, not to exist of steady waves or the position of the moon, but from the necessity to that we leave something we have to think about together. We are the museum, a collection of testimonies in service of the community and her development. And I think that we are the museum, that is, if you talk about a city museum, that you show that the people in the city conceive themselves as the museum, is something that really gives you a lot of energy and fuels you to move to a next level. So how to end this presentation? I would like to end with Alessandro Barico, who wrote also a couple of days after the first lockdowns in Italy, a piece that, and I translated very freely, and for me it has become an inspiration. The shock has arrived. We suffer from the crisis. The earthquake is far from over. The pieces are all there, wounded on a chessboard, but they are there. And there is a game that has been awaiting for us. What an unforgivable nonsense it will be to fear playing the game. And I think that what I would like to say with that is that I think we as museums, we should be able to play the game. And we should be able, we have this heritage, we have these knocked over pieces, but we also have the people now inside the cities that have been knocked over. And together with them, we can really make a contribution to promoting social equity and growing sort of unity between the various communities that we engage with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we know that the board is set and the pieces are moving.
Thank you very much. The Q&A session will be after the third and the last panelist in this session. And now it's time for Michal Niezabitowski, a natural-born and die-hard city museum professional, speaking about a city museum professional as the Tender Narrator. Is that a reference to our Nobel Prize-winning Olga Tokarczuk? Let's find out.
Hello, dear colleagues, dear friends. I tried to be lecturer just now, but please believe me that it is very nervous and stress to be host of Digital International Conference. But as a historian who has status of a scientific worker, I ought to recognize the reality through my mind, without which science does not exist. However, I am also a museum professional who recognizes the reality both through science and through art. That is why I frequently explain the world to myself by means of my senses. The conflict between the sensitivity of an artist and insight of a scientist has accompanied me since I was a child. Fortunately, it is not a conflict which would destroy me. On the contrary, I get an impression that thanks to it I am able to view the world from two perspectives. 2 years ago, at the General Conference of CAMOC in Kyoto, when I was searching for the answer to the question about the role of a museum in contemporary city, I found inspiration in the scientific writings by the eminent Israeli historian Yuval Harari. In my lecture, I made an argument that in view of the twilight of the species of Homo sapiens, which is prophesied by Harari, museums should try to play the game for paving the way for new men, Homo novus. It is only the new man who can build a new civilization in place of that of development which leads our species to collapse, a civilization which reasonably uses the inherited resources, a civilization of heritage, a civilization of museums. But what does that mean, to pave the way for the new man? In that way, can museums achieve it? The shortest way to achieve this goal is, in my opinion, to build a narrative about the new world, the world of sustainable development and respect for otherness. This is how I see the history of tomorrow of the city museums. Due to the terrible typhoon, my journey back from Kyoto took a very, very long time. I was even forced to travel a distance of 13 kilometers on foot, carrying 2 suitcases, walking through the rice field destroyed by the hurricane. After my happy return, I had no idea, none of us did, that typhoon by which Japan was bidding goodbye to us was nothing compared to the disaster which struck all the world in 2020. I'm afraid that the epidemic on COVID-19 confirmed what I was talking about in Kyoto. Homo sapiens building the civilization of growth and progress has led us such a state that knew we are at the crossroads. Is it by accident that the developed countries were struck by the coronavirus pandemic heavier than those still developing? It is not my intention to prophesy something terrifying now. It could hardly be denied, however, that the past year was really terrifying and made billions of people in the world fearful. It is to this fear that I want to refer. since I was looking for inspiration for my lecture in Kyoto from a scientist, now for the lecture at the Krakow conference, I have turned to an artist. Olga Tokarczuk, Polish writer, the 2018 Nobel Prize winner, titled her first book, published after receiving the Nobel Prize, The Tender Narrator. Do contemporary townspeople not need tenderness today? Looking at contemporary museums and present-day cities, I wish to devote my today lecture to calling for tenderness. The word museology, so suddenly and violently stricken with the epidemic in March 2020, plunged into a situation which was unprecedented in its long history. Overnight, it was cut off from the worked-out ways of contacting of public. The sudden disruption of this relation came as a real shock for our community. In response to it, museums made a huge technological leap and mastered a range of new skills in the sphere of navigating in cyberspace. In this field, we made a great effort to build new bridges of contact with the public in place of the destroyed ones. An unquestionable value of that effort is the fact that we have shown agency, but at the same time, can we prove that the mere presence in cyberspace show that we have maintained the same warm-hearted and living ties with the public, and perhaps everything that happened should prompt us to make those ties even closer, simply tender. It was not for nothing that Orhan Pamuk wrote, "Inside us and between us, the whisper of a tale is constantly heard." The word whisper is not insignificant here. There are not many who would listen to someone who is whispering. The whisperer has little chance to being heard. In his loneliness and fear, he may need. We as museum professionals must not give ourselves over to the activity which sometimes resembles production of exhibition on other events and sometimes border of workaholism, while we neglected the observation of the world. People have always differed from each other, but can we come to terms with the fact that the political election in which we have been participating from the past decades or so have been marked by such unusual polarization? This is the case of my country, which is divided almost in half, where the vision of conservative society and stable national state collided with the vision of society which is liberal and pluralistic in its multiculturalism. It is not the difference, however, that are worrying, but the level of emotions they evoke. As a result, we deal with the tribal conflicts in which the only recipe is to get rid of your rivals. This phenomenon is not limited to my country. Hungary, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Israel, and many other societies have experienced these divisions. I think that this kind of trend will expand than disappear, and my conviction was confirmed by dramatic scenes which took place outside the American Capitol. We represent city museums. Therefore, we must not fail to notice that the axis of the conflict runs through the cities. In Budapest, Istanbul, And in Warsaw, the local authorities do not come from the same political camp from which the national authorities come. In this context, the slogan of our conference, "You have right to the city," has two faces. For it means that both the minority and the majority have to right to it, regardless of which road the borders which cut them take. The modern world and contemporary cities are filled with growing conflicts. The subject of these disputes is politics, ecology, climate changes, equality of race, gender and religion, social security, or even the attitude to the past. In my opinion, I repeat, this is a conflict between the Homo species of Homo novus that is irretrievably departing into the past and the new species of Homo novus that is being born. In my judgment, it is impossible to stop the changes which mark the modern world. Anyway, a historian knows that it was never possible. What can that mean from the perspective of a man who, as an individual, is completely helpless and powerless when faced with the forces which clash before his eyes? Sometimes it takes place in his city, his neighborhood, or his home. I don't have doubts that confronted with the described conflict, man is afraid. Fear and trembling overwhelm him. That is why now I should like to connect the beginning of my lecture with the argument leading to the end. The world needs a new narration, a new tale about itself. The world has to be told from the beginning. Man has to invent himself and narrate himself anew. However, the world will not be able to do it without museums. It is us who have to tell the world about its past. Without the narrative, the world is bound to get lost. How are we supposed to do it? I have already referred to the Turkish writer Orhan Pamuk because I extremely liked is that Orhan talks about the whisper. At the beginning, I referred to the Polish Nobel Prize winner Olga Tokarczuk. By the way, is it a coincidence that the prizes of the Swedish Academy of Science went to artists who came from countries where these tensions are so strong, from the countries of young democracies, where the political transformations were so fast? Shortly after receiving the Literary Nobel Prize for 2018, Olga Tokarczuk put forward an argument that the world requires a tender narrator. Does it not need also a tender museum professional? And how is this tenderness to manifest? Freeman Tilden, author of the immortal book Interpreting Our Heritage, sets down in it his 6 principles over heritage interpretation. In Principle 5, he points out that interpretation should aim to present a whole rather than a part, and must address itself to the whole man rather than any phase, to the life of man as a whole. Thus, a museum professional is not supposed to refer to what he wants to pass to others, what he wants to say. Our task is in the first place to listen to man, receive him as a whole, with his feelings, emotions, and needs. This is exactly the year when our Museum of Krakow strategic plan came to the end. In February, we started constructing a new strategy, revising also the mission of our museum. After a long discussion, we finally accepted the following words. We listen to the city, we narrate and document Kraków. I am Kraków. It is not by accident that the process of listening to the city was included in the first word of our mission. We had been growing up to such a formulation for a few long years. I must say honestly that the ability to listen is not that easy. The inhabitants of our city deserve listening for their whispers, since, however, they are lost, like the inhabitants of all the cities of the world. They tend to be nervous, demanding, impatient, and pretentious. It is by far easier not to be a tender narrator, but from a height of foreown knowledge, which the use of the authority of the curators, make your own narrative. Inside us, there is still Homo sapiens holding tight the child of Neolithic revolution. The man dislike losing control and power, his advantage. That man likes to reign over the surrounding world and over nature. Also, the child of the Neolithic revolution still works in the museum. This child is us. What is it that we want to control? The public. We are still a 21st century tribe when we want to impose veneration over the city. But if so, is the slogan, "You have right to the city" true? Rather not. It should rather read, "We shall tell you to what kind of city you have the right, and we shall fix the boundaries of these rights." When in March 2020 lockdown was introduced in Poland, our museum was closed. Looking for a way of performing our job in new condition, we announced the action, stay home and tell Kraków. The idea was simple. If you have to stay in your own flat, then from your own perspective, from the perspective of the window of the locked up flat, disease, loneliness, and the fear caused by the epidemic danger, share your tale about it with us. The project Stay at Home and Tell Kraków emerged out of the conviction that the citizens, detached from the normality of his ordinary life, will feel the need of sharing his experience. Our appeal, Narrate Kraków, soon met fertile ground, which was demonstrated by the tales passed on to us. The word tales must be put in inverted commas, because a tale has many names. So we received stories, written in prose, poems, diaries, but also works of visual arts, photographies, graphics, comics, cartoons, and even songs written under the influence of epidemic. What is unusual and effective in this collection? It is the fact that this extraordinary harvest is an effect of a simple invitation to share narratives, and which is the most important, the assurance that we shall listen to them carefully and tenderly. And perhaps the most important was still another thing, namely the fact that our claims about our tender mindfulness were believed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the director of the Museum of Krakow, Mr. Michal Niezabitowski.
Ladies and gentlemen, we remain in Europe, but we're moving northwards.
Let's invite Morien Rees from Norway to discuss Sites of Transition, the museum in an emerging global network of interconnected, sustainable cities.
From the Arctic, Norway, and thank you for the invitation to address this CAMOC conference. Here is the planet Earth, alias the blue marble, the iconic photograph from the Apollo missions. In 1970, while viewing the same blue marble, Jack Swigert, one of the astronauts of Apollo 13, made his now celebrated remark, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Today, the blue marble itself has a problem. Us. In short, we live under a system committed to unlimited growth. The only possible result of unlimited growth within a finite system, like a blue marble, is system collapse. We have created an unsustainable world, exemplified at least in the global north by concerns about the environment, biodiversity collapse, melting ice, rising acidic seas, disappearing topsoil, and climate breakdown. Although in the global south, the concerns are primarily economic and social. It's no coincidence that environmental protection, economic viability, and social equity are described as the three pillars of sustainability, although there is much to argue for adding a fourth, culture. What is the international society's response to this unfolding disaster? Although the younger generation have offered us a solution, listen to the science, society's response is not reassuring. Nonetheless, we do have one binding political framework signed by every country in the world, Agenda 2030, with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to transform our world. There's also a non-binding one, much in focus at present, the Paris Agreement on limiting global warming. The latest report issued last month, covering submissions on reducing emissions, indicates that changes in total emissions will be small, minus 1% in 2030 compared to 2010. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, by contrast, has indicated that emission reduction to meet the 1.5 degree temperature goal should be around minus 45%. The authors of a new report predict that the average annual temperature on Earth will temporarily hit 1.5 degrees Celsius at some point in the next 5 years. This likelihood has doubled since last year. What is the response of the museum sector? Well, there's much to celebrate in the individual response of institutions and practitioners worldwide, although on a global scale, little is coordinated. ICOM has recognized that problem, not the least through the role played by our last distinguished president, who I'm delighted to see at the top right-hand corner of my screen. Sway established a working group on sustainability in 2018 and advocated a focus on sustainability at the Kyoto Triennial. And this resulted in the Kyoto resolution and advocated a focus on sustainability. The Kyoto resolution, which is on sustainability and implementing Agenda 2030. In 2020, the working group has been given a second mandate and the responsibility of being ICOM's hub on sustainability and climate breakdown. ICOM has chosen to frame its approach in ethical terms. This should not be surprising. Museums have increasingly recognized the duty of care they owe to their visitors, communities, and society in general. A central feature of this duty is acting as stewards of the global memory. ICOM itself, through the Code of Ethics first adopted in 1986 and revised in 2004, has led the way. A review and possible revision is on the table at present. The working group has coined the term an ethical imperative in describing the urgency of why museums should acknowledge and reduce our environmental impact, including carbon footprint, and help secure a sustainable future for all inhabitants of the planet, human and non-human. The working group's practical response has been to identify, broadly speaking, 3 approaches. How museums themselves and their operations can become sustainable, how museums through dissemination can assist our publics in achieving a sustainable future, and how to make ourselves redundant, the measure of success of our approach. These are some of the initiatives that the working group is involved in inside and outside ICOM. I'll just run through them, I shan't talk over them. And outside ICOM, we've also had a number of initiatives. Among others, in the EU programme Voices of Culture, the Global Coalition United for Biodiversity on Earth Day. We're involved in a dialogue with Race to Resilience, collaborating with the C40 Cities Organisation, developing initiatives between participation in COP26 and pre-COP in Milan, in dialogue with the consortium examining the possibilities of joining the Horizon Work Programme. And we've also been represented in the process of concretising the Norwegian Museum's Code of Ethics. What these initiatives indicate is that there's a growing demand both within the ICOM family and outside it for a change from an advisory to a more active role for museums. This unfortunately creates some challenges within the organisation, ICOM, and for the working group, in that ICOM statutes limit the role of working groups to solely reporting to the executive board. However, as we wait for the scale of the task to sink in and ICOM to provide an appropriate response, the working group has taken a pragmatic view of the statutory limitations and embraced this more active role. This also relates closely to the third goal I mentioned, to make ourselves redundant. This will be achieved by ensuring every member, institutional and private, together with the Secretariat, are all fully conservant with the scale and urgency of the challenges in front of us, and are committed to engaging actively in transforming our world to a sustainable future. The means for achieving this are being debated within the organisation at this very moment. Define a probable revision of the ethical code and strategic planning for the next period. It is indisputable that each of these processes must be founded on the reality facing us. As the kids say, listen to the science, take the consequences. So, turning to the future, how can museums become sites of transition? Well, the possibilities are endless, limited only by the creativity of the practitioners themselves. Today, I will allow myself the luxury of focusing on one possible pathway: dissemination to our public in collaboration with other actors, specifically in the context of one of the Sustainable Development Goals, number 17. The SDG 17 is about partnerships for goals, strengthening the means of implementation and revitalising global partnerships. It refers to the need for cross-sector and cross-country collaboration in pursuit of all the goals by the year 2030. It's a call for the alignment of policies of strengthening cooperation using the SDGs as a shared framework and vision for defining the collaborative way forward. Here, we return to the sphere of stewardship, of museums assisting communities by becoming central in facilitating and disseminating multi-level approaches in a transition to a sustainable future. The idea of multi-level approaches is found in the research of the first woman Nobel Prize winner in economics, Elena Ostrom. Her work on climate change centered on communities, the commons. Museums are one of the few remaining examples of a truly global commons and polycentricity. After the disappointment of COP15 in Copenhagen, Östrom showed that new and more dynamic forms of response were appearing around the international climate change regime centered on the United Nations Framework Convention, emerging spontaneously from the bottom up, producing a more dispersed and multi-level pattern in response. And she wrote, "Do not despair if politics moves slowly at the international and national levels, because a diversity of actors and institutions is already self-organizing in ways that will help to compensate for the collective inaction at higher levels." Drawing inspiration from the work of Ellen Ostrom and the Sustainable Development Goal number 17, the Global Museum Institution might foster sustainability by taking the initiative to align the diversity of actors and institutions and their activities in global dissemination projects. And what might be CAMOC's role in such initiatives be? Consider the importance of the city in transforming our world, the goal of Agenda 2030. By 2030, the planet's megacities will have increased from 33 to 43, mainly in the south. 5 billion people will be living within cities. And by 2050, 70% of the world's population will inhabit cities. Any pathway to a sustainable future must traverse cities of the future. Ashley Dawson, in her quite exceptional book, Extreme Cities, suggests that cities represent a paradigm example of unlimited growth within a finite system, one that must be addressed if the planet has any hope of achieving a sustainable future. Global networks of interconnected cities are emerging, diverse groups of cities interacting in ways that could have far-reaching influence on how the planet's life support system evolves. Among these are two quite diametrically opposed approaches. Fearless Cities is an informal global movement of activists, organizations, councillors and mayors that are working to radicalize democracy, feminize politics, and drive the transition to an economy that cares for people and our environment. The City 40s network of the world's megacities is committed to addressing climate change. C40 supports cities to collaborate effectively, share knowledge, and drive meaningful, measurable, and sustainable action on climate change. Further emphasizing the importance of cities, the IPCC, in its 6th assessment report, due to be released in May 2022, for the first time gives special attention to cities and announces the commission of a special report on cities. At an elementary level, CAMOC, as a network of knowledge institutions and practitioners, ethically bound, serving their communities, might investigate becoming a dissemination hub for those emerging city networks, becoming sites of transition. More specifically, and here I will be forgiven for the liberty I'm about to take, CAMOC might consider a pilot scheme built upon the body of knowledge that is assembled on migration. Migration is, of course, central to the growth of the megacity in the 21st century. It is also fundamental in addressing sustainable futures. However, here I'm thinking of migration away from the city due to rising sea levels. Ashley Dawson in the Extreme Cities writes, almost all of the world's great cities are sited on or near bodies of water. 13 of the world's 20 largest cities are port cities. This has generated a deadly contradiction, one of the most overlooked facts of the 21st century. The majority of the world's megacities are in coastal zones threatened by sea level. By 2025, more than 75% of the world's population will live within 200 kilometers of the sea. A recent report from the World Meteorological Office stated that the atmospheric burden of CO2 measured in April 2021 at 419 parts per millimeter is now comparable to where it was during the mid-Pliocene warm period around 3.6 million years ago. During that time, the sea level was about 78 feet higher than today, 24 meters. As we view the exponential growth of CO2 in the atmosphere, I conclude with the following invitation. The Working Group on Sustainability would like to initiate a conversation with CAMOC to investigate the possibility of an international dissemination project. A possible theme, the challenges of rising seas, the global coastal cities on the blue marble. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morien. We have got time only for one question, I'm afraid, and it is a question to Margriet.
Could you speak about the technical side of the crowdsourced exhibition Corona in the city? What were the practical challenges? What technological platform would you suggest for replicating this model in other contexts? What further potential do you see?
For that question. I mean, we were already in the chat talking to one another, and I was referring to I've referred her to also my colleague, Maurice Seleki, who has done this technical side. I'm super grateful that we worked with a fantastic team of web builders, artists and so forth to do this, and designers, but also actually, and that's the most important thing, I think, we collaborated with the whole museum. So everybody was participating in bringing in knowledge and also putting metadata to the submissions and so forth. But actually it was not a complex project at all. It was also fairly cheap. It is just, you have to have a lot of partners actually to set out the form and that people can submit their contributions to. So it's more, I think the technical stuff is like totally not high end, but if you want to know more, there's next week also a conference where we will talk a bit more together, Maurice and I, on the more practical side, although it's fairly also marketing communication. But actually, I would like to just say that the other two talks were amazing, and in this panel, and especially Morien, I think that you're so right that the real pandemic is the sustainable pandemic and the climate pandemic, and I think that definitely should be on a priority list. And I think I would love to learn more, and I would like to be part of any group that you're launching in CAMOC to participate in that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very exhaustive explanation. And I believe something's starting to happen that we really are looking forward to. You suggested working with Morien, so perhaps this is some kind of networking.
Ladies and gentlemen, the agenda says it's a break, but it's not a regular break. This one's going to be creative, and it's you who are going to be creative during the break.
And creativity is what is useful in networking. And networking is the heart of all conferences, isn't it?
Which is why we want to give you an opportunity to contact, to chat, to connect.
Or in other words, time has come for the creative break.
We've already hinted that we'll divide you into small groups of 5 that will have an opportunity to discuss the take-home messages from today, expectations about what's going to come, and all the news from the world of city museums that we'd be normally exchanging during coffee breaks, lunch breaks, and at all the moments that we use for talking and striking up new contacts and friendships.
After 5 minutes, we will swap the rooms. So you will find yourselves with 4 new people each 5 minutes. So get perhaps one of those ready so that you can advertise your contact to all those people without losing time for really spelling all those long addresses.
This is the time left to you, to your curiosity and to your invention.
And then we will have a real, very short break, and then we reconcile back at 5 p.m. Central European Time, which is midnight in Tokyo, and 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
See you then.
Thank you very much for being so very active, not only during the break, which was there for networking, but also during the break, which was there for the break.
I hope that we've all enjoyed ourselves and made some new acquaintances and certainly refreshed some older ones.
And it is time for our second content session today. It will take an hour and it will include the last papers and the Q&A session.
And the first speaker in this session is Jakob Ingemann Parby from Denmark.
So we are staying in the Nordic states, and right to the city crept for the first time into the title of a paper. So it's Right to the City, Curatorial Practices in the Making of the New Museum of Copenhagen.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to talk about the museum that we just opened right before the pandemic struck. So in February 2020, we reopened the Museum of Copenhagen, the City Museum of Copenhagen, after I think almost 5 years of shutdown, which I will hint to during my presentation. And I think in my program, in the program text, I have promised a lot of things. I perhaps cannot do all of them in 15 minutes, but we will talk definitely about the way we have involved citizens and the way we have integrated the city into the museum in our curatorial processes. And I hope that you will find it interesting, and I will of course be happy to discuss afterwards. I'm Jakob Ingemann Parby. I'm a curator at the Museum of Copenhagen and specializing in urban history, migration history particularly, and also the history of urban infrastructure. But since it's not a big museum, I have been working with most of the history of Copenhagen during my time here. So we moved from this nice place in the suburbs of Copenhagen, the oldest suburbs of Copenhagen at Vesterbro, where the museum existed from 1956 to 2015. And then we moved to this spot. It perhaps doesn't relate too much for you, but it was in the center of the city, very near the city hall. And the move was partly something that the museum itself was really eager to promote, because we have realized during our time in Vesterbro that it was a very nice location, but it was also a little bit of a local neighborhood museum. There was not that many visitors from the rest of the city, and even though it was only 1 kilometer from the center, it was to some people not that easy to find, surprisingly enough, even for tourists. So this move was meant partly to increase our visitor numbers, but it was also part of this plan that was to create around the central government quarter of Copenhagen a kind of cultural neighborhood along the lines of the cultural neighborhood you could find in Vienna, for instance, or in Montreal. We have since moving here developed this relationship, although of course the pandemic has perhaps made the larger plans still a little bit inept or not fulfilled yet. But this was sort of the background for it, and we didn't move like this, as was the case in 1956 when we moved from the city hall to Vesterbro, where there was this whole parade. But we had a very big opening and a lot of visitors and a very good time. In February, just before, as I said, the pandemic struck, so we had at least 1 month the experience of joy from all the Copenhageners that were really eager to have their museum back in shape and open for the public. One of the reasons it took so long was this fact that the whole building was a listed building and that we moved into, and it had other functions before. And part of the move was also restoring and repurposing this listed building. As you can see, that was quite a task, not least pulling all the cables that are necessary for creating a modern exhibition experience and creating an elevator and other necessary requirements for running a modern museum. Here we are seeing some of the decorated rooms that were part of the attractiveness of the building, seen from our perspective, because it used to be the public trustee. So, and the decorations reflected this. For instance, the little infant over the door was one of the persons or one of the inhabitants that you could have been taken care of, or at least the money could have been taken care of until he was of age or she was of age and could take care of her own property and inheritance herself. So this was the original function of the building, and one of the largest decisions of restoring it was to bring the original colors back, because it had been used as municipal offices before we came back and had white walls and a lot of installed items that were mostly for creating a better working environment. But we wanted to restore it as it was in 1894 when it was first built. And this was a big decision because in a way it's easier to make exhibitions with rooms with white walls and you have more freedom, or black walls, or that whole idea. But on the other hand, with all these decorations, it also gave an extra quality to the whole museum experience to do like this. Along the way, during all these years, we didn't just stay put and did our own work. We also involved Copenhageners and former users of the building in sort of discussing what were the narratives that were important to keep in the building and to retell in the building. So, of course, we were not going to be a museum about this house, but on the other hand, it was a house with such a rich history that reflected the history of the municipality and the city as a whole during these last 120 years. So it made sense to involve them. And we dedicated even one room to retell the story of the building, from the first public trustee through public health nurses, visiting nurses, to this last function of municipal housing, which in a very nice way can be connected to the modern development of Copenhagen, because as you can see, this ran until the early 90s, and at that point, Copenhagen was actually almost bankrupt, and the municipality needed money in a big way. So this period in time was also the start of the whole regeneration of Copenhagen, where selling out of all these municipal properties were part of the plan to create a new metro, to create new neighborhoods, to develop the Øresund region, and sort of the start of the whole bus that are now Copenhagen as the most livable city, or the third most livable city, or whatever we talk about now, but also one of the most expensive cities in the world. So it's really nice for me also as a curator that we have this building so very closely connected to both the municipal story and also both the older and particularly the more modern part of Copenhagen's history. But it should not all be about the building, and the goals and guidelines that we sort of developed for ourselves in creating the new museum was this, that we wanted to, as I already mentioned, to go to a central place, to be more a museum for all Copenhageners and all the people that actually use the city. We wanted to sort of reopen this very beautiful architecture. We wanted new users and, ironically enough, more tourists. They are probably a bit away now, but we couldn't, of course, foresee that at the time. And then we had these principles of the museum and the city, and particularly the city and the museum that I will talk more about, as well as sort of a general principle that we are working along, where we try to be very open and transparent in our methods. So we don't just tell the story in a kind of official way, but we try to also make visible to people that this are an interpretation created by certain methodological and also perhaps theoretical perspectives on urban development. Just very closely, we can see here that the lower part of the building is special exhibition area and a cafe, and the upper part of the building are the permanent galleries, and then in the sort of heightened basement, there's also a school area and a wardrobe and the workshop area and so on. But for the permanent exhibition, which I will address mostly here, because that was what I was mostly involved with, we had this idea to create a chronotopical curation. That was what we call it, inspired a little bit by Michal Bachtin's concept of the chronotope, which he uses mostly for literary analysis. But the idea was to create an exhibition where each era was unfolded through a specific location in the city, preferably one where you could still see traces of this period in time. For instance, the Boris in Copenhagen is from the 17th century, so that could be the starting point for telling the story about the 17th century city. And similarly, the City Hall Square and the City Hall was an obvious starting point for telling the story about the city around 1900. So this was a principle that we further developed, and had this idea also of which were the sites and the particular buildings that we wanted to draw into the galleries somehow. And then our architect came up with this idea that we also integrated one-to-one casts of elements from the city. So here you see the process. They went out in the city and almost with a rectangle decided what sections of a building or a sculpture or somewhere else was interesting to integrate. And then these casts came into the gallery, just as each gallery was actually also named after the site or the area of the city. So it was a very literal way of drawing the museum into the city. And these casts are also a way where you can actually touch stuff in the city that you normally don't touch when you're out there. Normally you don't walk up to a sculpture and touch the feet a lot, for instance, or you don't walk up, perhaps you cannot not even reach it. And but this is a way also to bring the city closer and hopefully give people the idea that after the visit they could revisit these places outside and have a new experience. I'm not sure about time, but I think I have a little more. This is the way we sort of try to mediate between the very beautiful original design of the building and the new gallery. So we wanted to create a kind of two-sided experience where you could still explore the architecture, but you could also feel very clearly what was the new city museum and what was the old public trustee building. And below you see a sketch of the principle, and here you see how it was unfolded. The most important thing perhaps was that we chose, or the architects, designers chose to work with white and glass as the material of different cases and interior design, exhibition design elements. And those were even created in materials that were sort of imitating material from the time periods that each gallery was dealing with. So for instance, here it is glass for the prehistory medieval gallery, but later on it would be white glass that imitates the glass of the electric lamps, and in between you would have things that look more like the marble of the absolute monarch's city in the 18th century. Here we have another design solution where you have this pavilion that again is in a way drawn in from the city outside, and inside you could then experience an animated movie placing you in the Amalienborg Square and seeing how the breeding rituals were at the time, which was also kind of fascinating because at the time in the 18th century you didn't actually touch each other very much. You bowed and you kept your distance, which suddenly became very relevant again in Corona times. And here we are in the 19th century, where it's more like the whole sort of Grunder time. And here we are at the City Hall Square around 1900. This just to give you an idea how the exhibition were designed. And as you can see, this way of design clearly gave people a feeling of how the city developed and hopefully also the processes that have formed it. But it didn't, in that sense, give so much of who the people were living in the city. And particularly, it didn't give that much of a feeling of who had the right to the city or who were sort of the motors of the city. Of course, I can't show you here, but in some of the stories, it was unfolded more. But we then also tried to integrate that element, for instance, following these ideas that many people have talked about, but also David Harvey, the idea that the right to the city is far more than the individual liberty to access urban resources. It is a right to change ourselves by changing the city. The freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. So in this upper floor where we talk most about the modern city, we also integrated contemporary life stories in the historical displays, as you can see here, where people from the neighborhoods tell their own personal stories, and in that sense traced how it could work. And we even in one gallery invited school children to explore and help curate the story about their neighborhood, both in the 1920s and how it was now. So they would walk with a group of artists and collect items from this area and sort of have a intertwined story about now and then. And actually, some of these kids even were speaking at the opening event along with the Majesty, the Queen, and the mayor and a head of homeless shelter. So this was a beautiful, I thought, a gesture of being a museum of the whole Copenhagen. Finally, and I think this is my last part, I don't know if anybody can indicate time, I can't really see it, but we had a room even called The Right to the City. So I thought I should end with that. And this room will explore the post-war grassroots movements, you could call it, in Copenhagen and probably also elsewhere, building alternative communities, urban utopias from below, which was kind of this big reaction against top-down urban planning that you also see, of course, in the United States and in other Western European cities. So we wanted to tell the local story, and we wanted to show the connections and shift in the form of protest and the historicity of increasing brutality and violence between authorities and protesters alike. And we did that by creating a film where participants as eyewitnesses could look back at their dreams and actions and even also reflect on if they would do them again in the same way and so on. We were quite aware that we didn't try to make a non-neutral, we were almost designing the non-neutrality of the museum because we didn't care for integrating all points of views. We consciously did not involve viewpoints of regular citizens, police, or other voices. We told it from the activists' own perspectives, and people could then discuss it and reflect about it afterwards. So from the squatters in the 70s to BZs in the 80s, from these construction site playgrounds to city-driven houses of culture, and finally a kind of discussion where is the struggle, conflicts, visions in the contemporary city. All this you could explore in different manners in an area with both these sort of statements and photos, but also the movie that hopefully gave that idea. And yeah, in the final room, then you had the new city model, which was a contemporary model where you could also sort of just explore the city as it is today. And it's kind of not that activist, but it's a very beautiful and very interesting perspective. And then finally we opened, had the whole queue down the line. I think it was 800 meters long at the most. And it was a big day for everybody, not least the people involved in creating the new museum. And hopefully, and also we got mostly positive reviews, which was nice. This review says that it's masterful, the new museum. So that was a nice thing. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I went a little too over my time, but yes, I couldn't see the time at the same time as this. I'm sorry. But, all right, I will stop sharing and.
Thank you very much for this highly inspiring statement.
We now have a message from the UK, and we're about to listen to Foteini Aravani from London.
London to have like sunshine, so please excuse if there are so many weird sounds of like birds and people mowing their lawns. Thank you, Jakob, for your great presentation, and I have to say that we're kind of in the same process, but probably 2-3 years behind you. So we are in the process of moving to a new building. We're hoping to open in 2024. So probably, hopefully, in 2 or 3 years, I will be presenting something similar to you, hopefully as great as your work. So today I'm going to talk about what we think is a right to the city through an oral history project, a community engagement oral history project that we're doing at the Museum of London with our oral history collections. So as I said before, we're moving to this building, which is the West Smithfield Market in the heart of the city. You can see that it's a very central space. So for us, it's a great opportunity not only to have a brand new shining building in a very unexpected for a museum place, which is basically a meat market, a disused meat market, but it's a great opportunity for us to rethink our collections, to rethink our mission, to rethink our role, our civic role in the city, to rethink our audiences, to diversify our audiences, and to open up, share, and democratize our collections at the same time. So 2 years ago, we started a project called Listening to London. This is a project that is funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation over 3 years. It's a community-led research project where we give access to our oral history collection. Our oral history collection has been digitized, so it was easy for us also over the pandemic to give access to community researchers to our collection and to hear new voices, new interpretations of the interviews and the life stories that we have in the collections. New interpretations from non-curators, non-academic, but from the actual people that form the collection itself. So this is part of how we are exploring and our collections moving to the new museum. We want to test different participatory practices, and this is kind of like an experiment, a test case of how we can do more participatory projects with different parts of our collection. It's a collaboration between Curatorial and Engagement. It's the first time that we do this, and we're halfway through the project, so we have another year to go. At the Museum of London, we have a very rich oral history collection, but I have to admit that it's probably a collection that is unloved. It has gone through a lot of obstacles, a lot of restructures, and for probably the last 10 or 15 years, we didn't have oral history curators. So I kind of like inherited this collection. And listening to London is a good opportunity to revisit the collection. We have more than 5,000 hours of recorded oral histories and life stories. And it was a very good opportunity to have an overview of the collection, to see who are these people that they have given us these interviews and what can we do with them. Oral histories, I feel, because of this, intangibility that they bear, compared to other, parts of the collection. They have a lot of soul and emotion, and I felt that it was about time we gave love back to this collection and a lot of this emotion that people have shared the stories with us. So whose stories do we collect? Museum of London is primarily a museum of social history, so we are telling the story of London from prehistory till now, but with a focus on the people, with the focus that have lived and have experienced the city. So we have kind of stretched the definition of a Londoner, who is a Londoner and what is a Londoner. So we're not only collecting oral histories of people who were born in the city, but we're interested in these people who came and left, who migrated, who have found refuge, and why. So it has always had a focus of capturing the experiences of the underrepresented or underserved audiences in the museum. Why are they valuable at the Museum of London? The museum is looking into the city through the eyes of Londoners. So we want to capture the heart and the pulse of London. So the oral history collection is giving this lived experience that sometimes is missing from the actual tangible, physical 3D objects. And probably they don't give you the facts, they don't document moments of history. But what I would like to think is that they eavesdropping on history. So you have basically the stories and the memories and the interpretation around specific facts that they could be represented better with physical objects. So they capture the past with a lot of emotion, and they basically interpret, document the past, and they're very inclusive and engaging. And what I like about them is that they allow you to create these personal connections with the stories that you hear. So when you hear someone sharing a story about life in London in the 80s, then immediately that triggers you and creates these emotional connections with that period of time. So we have the oral history collection used to be very strong and active until up to 2008, when we had an exhibition called Belonging, and it was a flagship exhibition for the Museum of London. So that was it was born again through another community engagement project that recorded oral histories of refugees that came from the, let's say, first wave after the big migration of the 90s. So we recorded 164 oral histories, and it was the first time that we actually held an exhibition purely on oral histories. And we actually exhibited, as you can see, some of the objects that are mentioned in the oral history collection as well. So what we wanted to do this time a couple of decades later, is we wanted to revisit that because we felt that probably our civic role as a museum is something that's what Belonging tried to do in 2008. So in terms of the engagement, you can imagine that the process changed a lot during the pandemic. So the idea was to have volunteers to come to the museum and research the collections in the building. But as I said, the oral history collection had already been digitized. So we were lucky to be able to give access online to the collection. So far we have recruited and trained 96 community researchers. So they were able to listen to interviews, to search transcripts, and to basically have an overview of the things that they are interested in. The project is finishing in February 2022 now, and the focus of the rest of the community engagement project will focus on the actual new galleries of the new museum, because we are planning to have community researchers to select the oral histories that will feature in the new permanent galleries. So the idea of listening to London is to give the collection back to the people. So we have oral histories of different community groups, different ethnicities in the collection, but these oral histories were probably recorded 10, 20, 30 years ago. So what we wanted to do is to take this collection back to the people, and we wanted them to listen to the oral histories with a fresh pair of ears. So we wanted the people to tell us what is interesting for them, rather than us deciding what is interesting and selecting them and displaying them in the new museum. So this is a mock-up of one of the galleries of the new museum. It's called the London Story Gallery. It's probably what we would call the most chronological and linear gallery for London. So we're hoping that we're about actually to start a participation project in July, where we're going to recruit 2 cohorts to listen and select oral histories around the empire, around arrival, identity and belonging, and around protest as well. We thinking about opening up our collections and diversifying our audiences, we are working with a disability group called Purple Stars, and they are a collective that are looking into creating more accessible and immersive and engaging displays for people with disabilities in the museum. So we're working with them at the moment in a gallery, a prototyping gallery in the current site, where we're testing ideas for the new museum. So they're opening a display in the end of July, and this is a mock-up they have created, how we can use more creatively and more accessibly our oral histories in the new museum. So this is a mock-up around women and travel. So as you can see, they have selected some oral histories, but also they're thinking of recreating smells that are mentioned in the oral histories themselves, or oral histories could come from, trolleys or suitcases. So something that will create a more atmospheric display, and it will merge the oral histories with different objects in the collection. As part of the output of Listening to London, we worked with descendants of Windrush generation, so immigrants from the Caribbean and West Indies that came on Windrush in the 50s. So what we wanted is to take again this collection and give it to the third, fourth, fifth generation of these people. And we wanted to tell us their memories and their interpretation of the events and the hardships that their families faced moving and settling in London. So they created a beautiful blog post where they have selected clips from oral histories, but also what you see above the clip is they added their own interpretation and why the reason they selected this clip. These community interpretations, we call them, will form part of our collection management system. So it will be information that we will be able to reuse in the future when we display that collection. After Black Lives Matter protests, we worked with participants of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we gave them access to our Brixton Uprising collection. So the protest that took place in the 80s, 1981 in London, and they did a brilliant work comparing the uprising of 1981 with the Black Lives Matter protest in 2020. And these are points of view that I feel that as curators wouldn't be able to give, partly because we didn't have that personal or emotional connection with the events or the collections, but they were able to give a different narrative and to give a different explanation to these oral histories. So there's another mock-up of how hopefully the new Museum of London will look like in the building. I hope that we will open in 2024. I hope that our community researchers will select our oral histories, and I hope that in 2 or 3 years' time, I'm going to tell you more about the participation project that we will be doing for New Museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Foteini Aravani. It was a very lively statement. It definitely breathed life into this digital conference. I believe it wasn't just us who could hear the gusts of wind and also some birds chirping.
Oh yes, this was really, really fantastic. Thank you to add some, I understand, garden atmosphere into those urban museums situated in the historical centers where blackbirds sing only in the dead of night.
Thank you again, and I believe it's high time that we start our Q&A session. We have quite many questions to you.
Yes, and the first question actually is to Jakob. Could you please tell us a little bit more about the audience's reaction to the City Museum's approach to tell the city's history from the citizen's perspective? The asker of this question is particularly expecting an answer in reference to the exhibition room with the theme, The Right to the City.
Which is, of course, really relevant. I think because of the long break, there was a lot of expectation for the new museum. So, of course, I think most people were really, really appreciative. but of course there were also critical voices, not least we've found that one of the difficulties was since we selected this focus on different neighborhoods, obviously we couldn't have every neighborhood in the museum, and that meant that some people felt like, why is our neighborhood doesn't have its own room and so on. So this was one of the reactions that we had afterwards, and we have sort of developed the kind of answer around that the story of specific neighborhoods is also a way of thinking about your own neighborhood's history and so on. But the other one about the right to the city room, I think actually that most people get the idea that even though they don't have to feel in agreement with the activists or their methods or their use of violence and so on, that the insight into why they did it and how they reflect on it now is also a kind of opening to look into what you would fight for yourself and what your own methods would be if you were to sort of be active in resisting or reforming the way a city is unfolding contemporarily. That's a very short answer to a very complicated question, but I guess, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The simple answers are certainly the best, so the more grateful we are for that one.
And we also have a question to Foteini Aravani. It is the following. Great to see how you're involving the voices of Londoners every step of the way. I wonder if the work of, for instance, the Purple Stars and community researchers is voluntary, or do people get a financial compensation? In a way, their work as curators is very valuable and important. Maybe we could actually call them co-curators.
That's an excellent question. So Listening to London was funded by Esme Fairbairn Foundation as a volunteering project. So the community researchers are on a voluntary basis. But we do realize that when we decided to involve them in the, co-creation of the oral history collection in the new museum, that we needed to give them a compensation for their time, because this is going to be a longer process. So we're talking about a 4 to 6 month project. So we have made a distinction between volunteering projects that are up to like a month long and participation projects. So the participation projects, we give them a compensation fee, especially when they attend meetings as well. So they have specific times that they need to discuss with us and the designers about the development of the content. Sorry, did I answer the question? I feel that there was something else that I'm missing.
Okay, and we also have one more question from Jakob to Foteini. Since we are currently working on a project regarding the soundscape of the city historically, I am curious if your collections give any insight into the sound history of London.
Much, Jacob. So we do have in the collection the first ever recorded soundscape of London from 1928, which was recorded by Columbia Records back then, and the Daily Mail as part of an anti-noise campaign that they chose 5 locations in the city. They recorded them to what I think it was the first mobile recording kits. And then they sent them to the Prime Minister to basically make the case of we need to do something about the city. So so that is in the collection. And what we did in May 2020, when it was, in the heart of like the deep silent, hardcore lockdown, we felt that probably London has never or will never sound like that again. So we commissioned a sound artist to go to the same locations almost 100 years later to record the soundscape of the city during the pandemic. And that has been accessioned in the collection. But yes, we're very, very interested in the soundscape of London and generally sound in the collections.
Sounds wonderful. Touch about that, I'm sure.
Wow, thank you very much. I didn't know that in the times of, I believe, Edison's tubes, you could already record mobile. I thought that this is a word that came much later. Speaking of later, we were supposed to have one more speaker a bit later. Unfortunately, she had a cycling accident, as we've been told. Therefore, this is the end of the papers, lectures for today. We'd like to thank very, very warmly on behalf of the organizers and, of course, all the participants listening, asking questions, participating, for your hard work, for all the slides, and, of course, for answering the questions.
You can probably guess that if we all met in Krakow, we'd be now grabbing you and pushing you into the carriages.
The fiakis, the droshkis, whatever you call them.
Yes, and taking you on a tour of our city and its museums.
However, as for some strange reason, you seem to be absolutely beyond our grasp, the only thing that we can do now is we have brought the city to you.
That was so long, and yet also not so long ago, that the Museum of Krakow only had 14 branches.
It don't move where the soul
This is going to be a longer trip, as it is a trip down the memory lane to the mid-13th century, when the city of Krakow received its great charter, and even to the days before that.
By the way, this is something you won't see walking the streets of Krakow, even with the best guide, unless you had the time machine.
Or you're Hermione, and you have your time turner from Hogwarts. The Krakow town hall stood proudly in the center of the city. For various reasons, it fell into disrepair. Part of it was even used as a granary. All that has been left is the tower, an important memento for the municipality and a witness to plenty of major historic events.
When torture chambers in the dungeon could no longer serve their purpose, we've turned them into a theatre and a restaurant. City museums are here to preserve things that are so normal for the residents that we wouldn't even notice if they disappeared.
As Robert Piaskowski, the Plenipotentiary of the Mayor of Krakow for Culture, noted, Krakow doesn't forget about its difficult past, although it would rather refer to it by saying, "The things are gone, never to return."
Have we told you the Museum of Krakow is over 120 years old?
No, we're such horrible hosts that we haven't.
So perhaps it's time to tell you that.
The Museum of Krakow is over 120 years old.
And it's been the city's mirror.
The looking glass.
We're looking around and see that most of the museum staff have already gone. So let's, in secret, show you the Krakow version of Night at the Museum.
Our version of Night of the Museum is such that we have here an instruction booklet on how to handle museum security. We were told to leave some lights on all night long, and we were warned not to let anything in.
Or out.
Anyway, we hope to survive the night here in the museum. Thank you very much for participation today, and hope to see you tomorrow at precisely the same hour, which in Central Europe is 2 p.m.
Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.